think, right? So I've hit start streaming.
That might be worth.
Yeah, we'll have a good chat about that. Right, I've hit start. So the chat is loading. Again, YouTube was last to join, so I know we're gonna have some problems with fucking YouTube again. I'm gonna have to cut YouTube, the biggest fucking video streaming platform in the world, and it's an absolute pile of crap.
I think a lot of people will agree with you on that as well.
I wouldn't mind, mate, but like we're so far into lockdown now, you're telling me they can't get a grip and update the network, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
To start with, they were like, oh, we never expected all this demand. It's like, well, you've got it, so fucking deal with it.
Yeah.
We're in it for the long haul.
We're on.
Right, well, we're about to be.
Andy Johnson is watching. Rich Spoet has joined. Wicked.
Good stuff. I'm just reloading it myself.
Yeah, I've muted the audio on the telly already. So.
Well, I'm just muting my phone now. Hi, Rich. How you doing, kid?
Mike's joined as well by the look of it.
Good stuff. Rich, yeah. Andy Johnson, Dunk, yeah. How's it going, Andy? You all right, mate? Excuse me, I've just had a few gulps. I've just had a few gulps. I'm going to be gassy for a while. Excuse me. Right then, so I'm starting to get a better grip on this now. My CPU usage, Woody, has actually just jumped up to 40% straight away. So, yeah, there's definitely something going on.
I've changed machines, right? And this is weird. I don't know whether you saw my posts the other night. I've got the lowest spec machine out of all the ones that I've got, and it seems to behave itself better than the higher spec machines. What the hell gives? And it's loaded from the same image because I just have an image that I load on.
I honestly do not know.
Fucking weird. I
Well,
don't care anymore.
We're here anyway, guys. It's now the 9th of June, and I mean, hopefully I'm going to have to see some damn change in the quality of these streams soon, because we've had so many breakdowns the last couple of streams. We managed to get through one with Simon Butler the other night, but when I watched it back, there was still definitely a lot of stuttering sections going on, but at least I got a complete stream out of it, and I've got someone else who can help me fix them afterwards now. But sorry if you are joining us on YouTube. The middle of the screen there, the chat is designed to pull in chat from Twitch, YouTube and Facebook, but if you're on YouTube and you are on Facebook, I'd recommend trying to join us on Facebook, because quite often, especially during lockdown, the YouTube chat has broken down. I've not been able to see it. It may break down as it is, because when I watched the video back the other night, I missed a lot of chat. It didn't appear here. So it's just to do with the way they're throttling the networks at the moment. There's not a lot I can do about it. But anyway, we're going to try and get through a stream tonight. I don't know how long this one will be, but hopefully it will stay up long enough to go out in one piece. And I have got your chat down here on Facebook, so I can more closely follow it if needed. And you can see, joining me today, I've got, once again, Mr. Duncan Woodward.
Oi, oi.
Oi, oi. And anybody who's been watching this series knows I had Woody on episode 1. It was a couple of weeks back now. We're now to episode 9. And he's gone away and he's had a think about it. And he's been watching pretty much most of these streams. And he's thought about a few different topics he wants to talk about. And he might be back for a couple more episodes yet, depending on what's going on. Now, your first suggestion, Woody, was... it was Japanese RPGs, wasn't it, your first one?
Yeah, it was, yeah.
And we did manage to 101 that one, because we couldn't make a successful case for it. But we're back now, and he's come back with a new topic, and he's had a big think about it.
And this one's going to be very divisive, actually.
Yeah, and this one has gone. He's gone a lot more specific this time, and it's something that's very close to his heart, quite literally. Because if you check out the T-shirt he's wearing, it's going to explain a lot. And it's this. It's the Commodore Amiga 600. And I'm going to let Woody tell you all about this and why he thinks it's the devil's bollocks.
Right, well, it's a very, very misplaced machine, in my opinion, and I think in opinion of a lot of people in the Amiga community. To start off with, the Amiga 600 was never meant to be the Amiga 600. It was designed by David Pleasance of Commodore UK to be the Amiga 300, a budget cut down machine which was going to be modular and expandable. and he went to Commodore USA with the designs of it, and they basically just ignored him. And then they come back later, about 6 to 12 months later, with the Amiga 600, which didn't sort of go by any of his design standards. It was no different to a 500 plus in capabilities. Yeah, it added an internal IDE header and the card slot on the side, but I'll come back to those because those didn't work on the early models anyway. And and they brought production of the machine to Scotland. You don't build a budget machine in the UK.
No, definitely
it's too expensive. I mean, later on they saw their mistake and they moved production to the Philippines, but I think it was a bit too little too late. For me, there's also a more close to heart story with this. I got my Amiga 500 Plus in Christmas 1991. And I jumped straight on the bandwagon of buying all the Amiga magazines, all the ones I could afford. And the Amiga 600 had just come out, and I read an article in Amiga User International about September 92-ish time, stating that Commodore were discontinuing the 500 and 500 Plus. So the 500 Plus had a shelf life of about 6 months. Max.
So as far as, I mean, for the people who are watching now, I mean, we're getting proper into technical specs and stuff now. So for those who don't know, the Amiga, well, the original Amiga concept was the Amiga 1000, wasn't it? That was the original Amiga, and then the one that gained real traction was the 1200 because that was the professional model, wasn't it? And
the 1000 was a big box model, and the 500 was a cut down version.
Yeah. That's what I mean. Then that's what I mean. The 500 was brought out to be the everyman Amiga, wasn't it? The gamer's Amiga.
2000 was the big box version of the 500. Yeah,
and the 500 obviously is the one that was the most popular, wasn't it? It was the one that sold, fucking however countless many, and it's the one that most people remember when they talk about Amigas, isn't it? Even if you tuned yours up and you added all the peripherals and that, people usually started with the 500. If you were really lucky, you picked up one of the higher spec Amigas, but most people it was the 500. Yeah. The 500 Plus then, what was the difference with that one over the 500?
Right, so the 500 Plus came with 1 megabyte of chip RAM instead of half a megabyte. You got the newer Kickstart 2, but you also got the enhanced chipset, which was just a minor refinement of the original chipset on the Amiga.
Could you not upgrade a standard 500 to a 500 Plus then yourself?
Yes, you could, depending on what motherboard revision you had. The later motherboard revisions of the 500 had empty spaces on the motherboard to solder in the extra RAM chips, and to get the ECS chipset you just changed the Agnes chip and the Denise chip on the motherboard and upgraded the Kickstart ROM chip from 1.3 to 2.0, so it's a relatively easy switch.
Now the Kickstart ROMs, if I'm not mistaken, you can pretty much install any Kickstart ROMs into any Amiga, can't you?
Yeah, as long as you keep towards the ones that are designed for that model. So
as long as the hardware spec is kind of relevant.
A 500 version of 3.1 and a 1200 version of 3.1 and etc. etc. But yes, you can have pretty much any combination of Amiga operating system and Amiga, with the exception of the 1200 that can't run anything less than 3.0.
Now the 600 is, I always thought it as a kind of anomaly. What's a real shame is, as a system, I mean, to look at it, it makes a lot of sense because the Amiga was always a beast of a thing, wasn't it? They were huge. Whether you had the 500, the 1200, or some of the big spec ones, they were fucking beasts of systems, weren't they? And the 600 brought it more back down to traditional micro size, didn't it?
Yes, it did. But the other thing I noticed with the 600, especially as a retro collector, the build quality in comparison between a 500 and a 600. A 500 is built like a tank in comparison to the 600.
So the
600 feels really cheap.
So in terms of expansion, then you say the 600 was a cut down version of the 500. I know it wasn't. I mean,
Cut
going
down
into the
size
reasons
more than anything else. Yeah.
So could you make a 600 as good as a standard 500 or a 500 plus, or were there some limitations?
Well, technically speaking, the 600 is the same capabilities as a 500 plus. It's the same machine. The differences internally is they added the 44-pin IDE header, so you could put a laptop hard drive in it. But they changed the well-known and well-used expansion slot on the left-hand side. They changed that to a PCMCIA card slot. Now, that's something that was standard in the PC world, but it was only just becoming a standard. It wasn't an agreed upon thing yet.
Yeah.
So it was very out of place for the Amiga, and nothing really existed expansion-wise for it at the time. Expansions didn't come along till quite a bit later, more so when the 1200 was out.
Now you mentioned that the 600 was moved into Scotland from where was the 500 built then?
I think it was Hong Kong and Philippines, depending on which era of when they were building them. I think it was Hong Kong, actually.
I mean, you would have thought that bringing it to a more of a first world country, first world capitalist country, I suppose, westernized country, would have improved the build quality somewhat, but it didn't.
No, because it was. I think it's because they were still trying to keep with the budget side of things. They'd overrun on how much it was going to cost to build. They were selling the machine at about 50 quid cheaper than the 500 or 500 plus, but it actually cost almost as much as that to make, so they weren't making anything on it.
So, I'm going to refer to the chat in a minute, because people are putting some stuff up that's probably more relevant than I could probably come up with. But is there anything of note in terms of? I mean, you got to remember the A500 was a gaming system. It was always going to be a gaming system.
Yeah.
Creativity and stuff you could do aside. I mean, and everyone did use it occasionally for stuff like that. Is there anything that sticks out in your mind that would have worked perfectly on a 500 that wouldn't work on a 600?
There are quite a few of the older games. Also, if you're using Deluxe Paint, for instance, D-Paint 3 came with a 3D perspective mode. I remember using this myself. So you could take an image of an area of the screen and you could rotate it about its X, Y, or Z axis.
Okay.
So you could actually make like a 3D plane. Now, to do that, the keys to control that were all on the number pad area that doesn't exist on a 600.
Oh,
you get a piece of emulator software to make certain keys on the keyboard emulate that, but that was horrible.
But that's ball like it's not an ideal solution, is it?
No.
Well,
and then another use case scenario was F-18 FA-18 Interceptor, which was a great flight simulator, but that used the keypad as well for control. So yet again, you're missing out on some control mechanism because keys are not there on the keyboard to do it.
It seems like a long-winded way of doing things. I'm guessing then, in order to get full compatibility, you would have had to shell out. What was the price difference between a 600 and a 500 at the time it was released? About 50 quid.
50 quid, yeah.
But in order to bring the 600 up to be on par with a decent 500, how much would you have been spending?
I don't know, because there's certain things you from a tech spec point of view, it's the same system. You don't really spend anything to bring it up to the same level as a 500 from a technical spec. The 600 is the same as a 500 plus, so it's the same system internally. It's just done differently.
It is a bit strange.
When I say cut down, I mean they cut it down in size and in build quality more than anything else. From a retro point of view, from a maintenance side of things of these systems these days, obviously everybody knows I'm a massive Amiga collector. I've had quite a few 600s that have been less than reliable. Whereas on an A500, everything's socketed on an A500 or a 500 plus. Whip the top off, change the chips, hunt the chip, and you're good. You're going to get it running within an hour tops.
When did you get your? I'm assuming you've now got one you do use. When did you get your first 600 then? When you were collecting, or back in the day?
No, it was when I was collecting. I got my first 600 around 2003, 2004 time.
Did anyone you know actually buy a 600 at the time?
Yeah, I had a mate who had a 600, and I used to go around there and play on it. I mean, from a gaming point of view, there was nothing really wrong with the system apart from the same compatibility issues that you had with a 500 plus.
Did you lose any ports or anything on the 600?
No, you got all the same ports. The joystick and mouse are on the left-hand side, and because of the way they haven't got the two little nuts either side of the joystick ports, so stuff with wider connectors doesn't fit in the socket. You have to get stupid leads to come out.
So it is a case that they oversimplified things, but actually made them worse in the process.
In that way, yes, they did. Yeah.
I think that's essentially typical of consoles in general. When they shrink them down, they make a lot of decisions which are designed to increase functionality whilst reducing cost. I mean, the best example of console miniaturization in my mind is when you start moving into Sony's era, because two of the more successful consoles to be shrunk, of course, were the PS1, which obviously had the one PS1 model, the stylized PS1 in writing, and then obviously the PS2 got shrunk down to be the slimline model. That one in particular, you lost a lot in the translation because you lost the sliding draw mechanism, which was obviously a failure point because it's a mechanical draw. And it made standing the console up on end a little bit more difficult, I could imagine.
You could get a stand for it though, if I remember right.
Yeah, you could, but obviously you can stand a normal PS2 up and you can be pretty confident it'll stay there, whereas the smaller PS2 you couldn't do that. And of course you lost quite a lot of things because you first of all the infrared port, the infrared port was made to be built in, wasn't it? And so was the network adapter. But you lost the iLink. Did you lose the iLink port?
Yeah, I think you did use the. Yeah, you lost the iLink.
I think you lost the iLink port.
It looked like a 1394 FireWire port, but it was actually, I think, bespoke to the PS2.
Yes, and then there was, and obviously you lost the hard drive bay, which was never fully utilised. But obviously, as from a collecting perspective now, you can obviously soft mod a hard drive to auto boot and load up all your games and that, which is fucking fantastic.
This is the bit that annoys me because I've got two slim PS2s. I don't have that one anymore.
It is a shame as far as that goes, because for a while you could get the fat PS2s a damn sight cheaper as well, and now the price is starting to creep up and everyone knows they can do it. But yeah, I mean, I know what you mean. Miniaturization doesn't always bode that well. Did the 600 have anything over the original Amigas then?
It introduced for the first time the internal IDE bus for hard drives, so you could get a laptop hard drive and bung it in.
Oh, and you could actually do that straight out the box this time.
Yeah, on the 500 and 500 plus, you had to buy that add-on that went on the side, and most of those were SCSI rather than IDE. And
IDE was obviously fast becoming the standard because it's from the PC, PC tech in it. Right,
some people have different opinions on which is better. It depends on your use case.
Right, I'm going to jump over to the chat now because a few people made a few comments, and I'm going to roll back a little bit. Some of the comments haven't come up in the middle, so I'll call them out off my feed here in a minute in case we've missed anything. Just scrolling back up, it takes a little while to actually register. Come on, you bugger. So yeah, it is stuttering the chat a bit, right? Right, so Mike Lee says Scotland.
Oh yeah, do you know what? I'm chuffed that they did it in some ways, but then in other ways, I think it was an error on Commodore's part. Well,
I mean, I know a lot of the classic British micros, quite a few were manufactured up in Scotland originally.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, I know. I'm trying to think of a good example now, but I know quite a few were done up there. Probably because they had the space and the factories, things had closed down from old industry and that. But yeah, I mean, you got a lot to thank them for. I wouldn't say that. I mean, moving the production to Scotland shouldn't necessarily have been a bad thing, but it definitely would have forced the cost up.
But it was from a cost point of view that it was a bad reason, nothing more.
Yeah, I mean,
the thing was they were trying to manufacture a budget cost reduced machine in an area that was more expensive to manufacture it in.
So was that David Pleasance's choice, do you know, or was that from Commodore America?
I don't think that was. No, that was Commodore USA's choice.
Yeah, definitely,
You know
definitely not
what?
a good.
This story is actually quite well documented in his book that he wrote recently.
You know what? I haven't fully read it. I have read chunks of it, but I haven't read it fully yet. I see. I think that's part of it because I know Commodore were going through a kind of a crisis of identity, and they wanted to keep everything American in what they did, and they didn't really expand out in the ways that they should have done. Maybe they thought because the Amiga was popular more so in Europe, that by bringing it to a prominent country in Europe, part of the UK, maybe they thought that would encourage people to get behind it more. But
apparently, a lot of these decisions were made by Mediali, who was in charge
fucking
of
useless.
Commodore USA. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he was. But apparently, a lot of the choices were made by him.
Right, as says this guy again. So I was like, yes, I'm afraid so. He's not
Don't
going
worry,
anywhere.
Az. Next time we're at an event, I'll Hadouken your ass on Street Fighter.
And Andy Johnson says for 1 megabyte. I'll tell you what, the price of memory back in the day was quite shocking when you compare it to what goes on today. But you've only.
You know what? I remember getting the RAM expansion to go in the trapdoor of my 500 plus to up it to 2 meg. I was like, wow, I've got 2 megabytes.
You know what? People talked about it back in the day, but I never really saw massive leaps from expanding RAM. What? I mean, give me a good example of when it came into good use. Give me an example.
Really, if you're using it as a production, productivity.
A studio, yeah.
Yeah, I did a lot of coding and stuff in Amos back in the day. So for me, the extra RAM was handy, especially as I didn't have a hard drive and I was using a single floppy drive machine.
Right, well, the guys are starting the fire here already. You knew somebody would do it. Andy Johnson says, I don't have this problem with a Mister. You just run whatever you want on it. Yeah. And Az says, why is the Atari ST better than any Amiga?
Oh, fighting talk.
the ST and Amiga thing, that was an evolution of the classic playground micro argument, was it? It went from Spectrum and Commodore.
Say that. Me and my mates didn't really argue about that, and some of us had Amigas and some of us had STs. The people we fought with were the bloody PC owners who were, PC master race.
Well, to be honest, both the ST and the Amiga were seen as elitist things where I came from. Not many of the kids had them, and the ones that did, they tended to be the better off kids, you know what I mean? And to be honest,
see, I didn't get my first Amiga till '91, so I was late to the party. But then, so was everybody else in the town.
I think I talked about this in one of the previous ones. We were still in the 8-bit micro territory around them, and people were very slowly then getting to grips with the idea of consoles. Everyone wanted a game, they wanted a console, and that was about the time that kids all started to actually get consoles. Not everyone did; it was less niche, but there were a few kids who had their 16-bit micros, and obviously they tended to stick with them. Some of them got the consoles as well, so they didn't exactly lose out. But yeah, my first exposure to them was the ST, and I loved a lot of the games that were on there, but purely because compared to my old Spectrum or compared to my NES, they were fucking miles ahead, you know what I mean? So anything that was on there, the type of games you could play on an ST or an Amiga were so different from the early console games. I'd be there playing Mario Brothers on a NES thinking, oh, this does it really well. Then I'd go to playing like a platformer on an ST or an Amiga where it's, sometimes the scrolling could be a bit iffy or there weren't much depth to it. You didn't have multiple buttons to use.
Well, you had bloody up to jump, for God's sake.
Yeah, which was, it was great on a joystick but terrible on a joypad. And then of course you'd see like things that the Amiga did, like the ST and the Amiga did better. Like I first played Lemmings on the ST and I fucking loved it. I'd play things like Populous and you got them Mouse and everything.
Games were brilliant.
Those were brilliant games for those. And obviously then when I found friends who had the Amiga, it always did it better than the ST did. But it didn't matter too much to me. But then I could still lord it over them because Street Fighter 2 on the Amiga is a fucking joke. And it couldn't do a decent fighting game, and around that time I was totally into my fighting games.
Yeah, you say it couldn't do a decent fighting game. There was a couple that were actually
I'm sure better than I can't think of a couple.
The control method let them down.
It couldn't compete with proper competitive tournament fighters like Street Fighter or that. It just couldn't reproduce. And Well, I say it couldn't. It probably could. It was just with companies working in timescales and that, it could never be done properly. I'm pretty sure.
US gold was the problem.
Well, yeah, because I'm pretty sure there's two versions. Because I'm pretty sure, didn't they do Super Turbo on the 1200?
There's actually 3 versions of Street Fighter on the Amiga. There's Street Fighter 2: The World Warrior, which is the one that everybody knows.
And it's dreadful.
It's dreadful. There's Super Street Fighter 2 that was released in both a 500 and a 1200 version, and then Super Turbo came out, which was on 1200 and CD32.
Now that looked and played well, at least from what I've seen.
It looked good, but ran at a snail's pace.
Oh, it did it. I wasn't aware.
The best version to play is the one in the middle, Super Street Fighter 2. But if you play the 1200 version, it has native support for CD32 pads, so you can have the 6 buttons.
Oh, so there you go. That's something I knew one. So it was just all about it being done well. I think maybe the people who worked on the ports or whatever they just weren't used to those type of games, and so it wasn't their forte.
Still pretty crap, but it played a lot closer.
Now you say that in stills, it's passable. You know, the sprites aren't the biggest, and there's obviously losses of frames
on Super as opposed to Super Turbo. On original Super, they had like a really ultra letterbox.
Yes, they did. Yeah.
It's like, what? It was more letterboxed than the SNES version.
To be honest, though, I could quite happily live with letterboxing as long as it moves at a decent pace.
Yeah.
You've only got to look at things like, we were talking the other day about Star Fox. You know, there's no way they could have got full screen to run at a decent pace. I mean, it still chugs a little bit now, and I have seen it, obviously that running with the FX 1.5 chip, which was eventually used in Star Fox 2 and Stunt Race FX. That actually performed a lot better, and if you play it on that, you notice the difference. We still can't do full screen. So, you know, letterboxing, I can usually forgive, because if it's a decent enough game, you don't tend to notice. Do you know what I mean? Everyone went on about when Street Fighter first came over, and yes, it was obvious, but it made no difference to how successful it was.
It didn't really make any difference to me, and as much as the Amiga is one of my favourite retro machines, I also had access to a SNES, because my brother had a SNES, and we had Street Fighter 2 on that. So I never played the Amiga version. I played it once around a mate's house, and he offered to copy it me, and I was like, can't be bothered, mate. I've got the SNES version.
Well, Rich Bowett says he thinks that the A600 can run pretty much all the demos that were run on an A500.
Most of them.
I'll say, because a demo is really a test of what a system can do, because they use all kinds of interrupts and hacks, don't they, to get the most out of it.
Yeah, they do. One of the problems with it is there is a couple of early demos that are looking for specific vector memory addresses and vectors for Kickstart 1.2 and Kickstart 1.3 machines. Those will fail on a 600.
I suppose, but that is more of a limit of the Kickstart things were a swappable part, so you could get that functionality.
You could make them run.
So as far as being a cut down machine, I mean, it obviously was, and you obviously had to make that difference. But for all intents and purposes, you could make a 600, a 500 if you really wanted to.
Yeah, you're just the only thing you're gonna miss is that keypad on the side.
yeah. Mark Wrightham's on here. He said, Woody.
Yeah. Paul Little's just dropped a comment in the
Facebook
bit
chat
on the side on the Facebook, and he says it's a cut down version of the Amiga 1200, only in case design. Internally, it's a 500 plus, so it's actually a cut down 500, really.
Yeah. Paul was also saying. Paul Cole was saying. Example of a good fighter was Body Blows. That was one I think I was thinking of.
Body Blows, and I liked the sequel even better, Body Blows Galactic. That actually
I never played that one. Never played that one.
Oh, that plays really well. But you can tell where they've got their inspiration from, because there's one character in it called Dan, and his moveset is just Ryu or Ken.
There's always going to be a shot-out character.
Punch and Hurricane Kick and Fireball. I'm like, they just ripped this off Street Fighter 2. So just a sprite swap.
Yeah, Paul Cole says he loves the Amiga demo, seeing the music was brilliant as well as the animation. Yeah, I mean, the Amiga was and is a fantastic machine. And I don't think there's anybody out there who could, even if you love your STs, it's like you'd be hard pushed to argue that the Amiga is in any way second place to the ST. It wasn't. The ST tended to be used more for certain applications than the Amiga did, purely because you had a convenience. Like I know the ST was used a lot for music production, purely because
for the MIDI,
but that was it's not something that wasn't possible on other systems. It was just that it was there out of the box. What I mean?
There's a very, very small number of games that run better on an ST due to the way the games are designed and the quicker the quicker 1 megahertz worth of CPU in the ST.
I think it'll always be a tough argument between the Amiga and the ST, because the ST was probably never allowed to reach its potential because of that same problem that was rife in the industry at the time.
The thing is, what Atari did is they did actually correct the wrongdoings with the ST. They brought out the STE, which had a blitter chip. It had better sound, closer to the Amiga, but nobody wrote anything that took advantage. Features.
It's much like, we were talking about the Jaguar before I came on here. Now the Jaguar, if people had taken the time to get to grips with it and learn how to use it properly, the same with the Saturn, the games could have been so much more impressive than they were. But what you got to remember is any console is operating within the confines of the business structure and the infrastructure of the industry in which it's been released. And obviously with the Amiga and the ST, because they were seen as their own market on their own, if you were developing a game for the ST or the Amiga, you would tend to develop it with the ST in mind. And you'd need it to run on both. So you'd have something that was a close port on either that never really took advantage of the plus points of either of the systems, because it was easy to do that. You could say the same when the 16 bits were out. The Mega Drive and the SNES were very close once people got to grips with it, and the ports tended to be generally identical and rarely took advantage of the plus points of either the console, because it was faster to just design it one way and just take it straight over. The Jaguar definitely suffered from that, because that's why a lot of the games on the Jaguar looked like their 16-bit counterparts, because at the time the software houses were developing for the other 16-bit platforms, so there was no sense and no time to make a better version for the Jaguar, and then there's no commercial drive to do that. I think with the Amiga and the ST, very much fell into that trap. I'm sure there's going to be exceptions. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I'm sure there's lots of examples of where the Amiga version shits on the ST, and 9 times out of 10, it would have been that way around.
Shadow of the Beast.
Shadow of the Beast? Oh, no, I played the ST version.
The ST version is awful in comparison. It's still good on the ST, but it's pants next to the Amiga version.
Right, I wasn't really aware of that one.
Turrican, it's really good on the ST, but the Amiga still pips it by quite a bit.
Yeah, it does. Turrican's a really good example, actually, because they were very close. Rich Spowett says International Karate Plus was probably better than the Street Fighter 2 conversion. Yeah, but that was a much simpler game that was always conceived to be on the classic micros and to be designed to play with the joystick. It was always going to be better because it had a lot more time to be developed for it. Street Fighter 2 was the next generation of arcade games being pulled in to be stuck on, retrofitted onto the existing micros. That was why Street Fighter 2 suffered so heavily.
A lot of people bitch about arcade conversions to the 16-bit micros, saying that they just cannot do arcade conversions.
That's the thing. They should be able to. It was just nobody at the time had the time or the experience of doing it, and so they would have thrown out whatever they were told to do, because the 16-bit micros lost traction quickly once the 16-bit consoles arrived. So there was less incentive to make anything special of them, because they weren't catering to the same market as the way they saw it. They kind of did it to kind of fill that gap, but then they weren't bothered about the quality. They just wanted to sell, didn't they?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Andy Johnson says the Amiga was better for gaming, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would say that.
It's more revered, but was it so far ahead of the ST?
I think the difference between the two platforms is overstated. I mean, from a fanboy point of view, because I love the Amiga so much, I would definitely love to say, oh, the Amiga trounced all over the ST, it was a million times better. But actually, in hindsight, when you look back, yeah, the Amiga was better in a lot of games, but there was just, there was a few games on the ST that were better as well. I think both platforms were much closer to each other than what people realised.
Yeah, I mean, Paul also said here, Stunt Car Race as an example. He says the frame rate's better on the ST.
Yeah, he's absolutely right on that.
Now, you had that set up side by side at Revival this year, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Obviously, I wasn't there to see it, unfortunately, but it would have been nice to have seen that, because that's one of my favourites. As weird as a game as it is, and probably hasn't aged all that well, it's still good fun to play. And
it's good fun to play when you got linked up with another person.
I'm sure it is, yeah, because obviously that two-player kind of brings it back a bit, It probably wasn't better from technical standpoints in terms of what was there and how they played. The way the commercial software houses tended to develop in the wrong way, unlike with homebrew coders these days. I mean, you could make that argument for any system, really. The demo scene, it's much as kind of an alien thing to me. I appreciate what they do, and they're doing things with systems now that we never thought would even be possible. Things that even the people who made them thought, well, that was not what it was designed for, but well done for working a way around it. Demo scene is like the technical equivalent to thinking outside the box in design. Yeah. It's like, it's the difference between building a typical house with, a front door in the middle, 4 windows up front and a slouch roof, and some new age, cutting edge fucking eco warrior, super fucking efficient design.
The best way I could put it is the demo scene is the computing equivalent to grand designs.
Yeah, it is really, and I mean they squeeze the most out of them. The things I've seen done with some ancient systems is crazy. I mean, given a good example on the game front, I mean, look what Baggers did with bringing Dragon's Lair to the fucking ZX81.
Oh god, that's crazy.
And okay, yeah, you needed obviously storage capacity in order to store all the frames of animation, but he still managed to make it perform in a way that it would change those animations fast enough and make it play like the real game, with the addition of the Z-Expand, obviously. But yeah, I mean, he made that system do something that it wasn't possible of doing. I'm pretty sure somebody's done that now with the BBC Micro as well, because I think Rich... what's his name? His name's just escaped me. Who brought the micros to Revival?
Yeah,
I forgot.
I know you mean. I can't remember.
Yeah, but obviously he brought Richard Broadhurst. That's it. I'm sure he had it running on a Beeb as well. Dragon's Lair. I don't know who ported that.
He had a port of Stunt Car Racer on the Beeb as well.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah. So. Paul said that Team 17 started out from the demo scene. Yeah, they did.
Well, actually, they were a PD library originally. They did write their own demos, and they were doing demo scene stuff originally, but they were actually under the name of 17-bit software, and they used to advertise in CU Amiga and Amiga format, basically the PD library, and you just found the number of the discs you want, filled out a little coupon, sent it off, and got your discs,
Yeah.
But they did a hell of a lot of demos.
So going back slightly on topic now, we've kind of drawn into the classic Amiga and Atari
just a little bit
brawl there, but I mean, going back onto it now, I mean, the Amiga 600, I mean, it's do you think it's got a place in terms of collectability now? Do you know how many people who seek to collect it?
Yeah, it does have a place, and for those who are going through the complete Amiga collection, then yeah, it's definitely an important machine to have.
What about people who haven't got any kind of Amiga, and do you think anyone would now opt for the Amiga in terms of a space saver, if nothing else?
Yeah, definitely for a space saver because of its smaller footprint.
What's the prices like on it now compared to a 500?
Do you know what? They're bloody expensive. The 600s
The 600s are?
Yeah, 600s are costing more than 500s on eBay at the moment, by quite a bit.
No way, I didn't realise it got to that stage.
I mean, don't get me wrong, that's stupid eBay and price hiking, to be taken into account.
You say that, but at the end of the day, when it comes to the collector's market, desirability is going to drive prices as much as rarity is, or availability. So if the prices are going up, it could partly be because it is now desirable, I mean, maybe people are thinking, I never had one, let's see what it's like. Maybe people are thinking, I want to get back into an Amiga, and the 500 is just too much of a bulky beast. Did the 600 get a better power supply than the classic Commodore power supply?
It actually got a worse power supply.
Was it bigger or just less complex and a bit more annoying?
Lower output, so you could quite easily overpower the PSU and cause yourself problems with the Amiga 600, whereas it was less possible on a 500. The 500, you either got the heavy power supply or the slightly lighter one, and they were usually something like
slightly
50
lighter
or 60. Yeah, they were usually 50 or 60 watts, whereas the 600 power supply was something like 23 watts. So even with just like an external floppy drive on it, you could end up with some issues.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's a bit of a weird one when it comes to looking at it as a collector's market. I mean, I think you'd be hard pressed to find anyone who would disagree with you on this one, because I'm not a big Amiga bod, but I know a couple of lads at school who ended up getting the Amiga 600 after seeing their friends with 500s, and that they were kind of felt they were under the impression they were getting the same thing. I think that is very much the reason why the Commodore 600 doesn't need to exist, because it didn't do anything better than a 500, and they had the gall to name it a 600. It just didn't make any sense. I know that was never the original intention, but that's what they were trying to do. You can tell that by naming it the 600, they were trying to pretend it was an evolution of the 500, which it most definitely was not. It cut too much out. It wasn't significantly cheaper enough to justify being an evolution of the 500. It didn't save on costs. It just compromised on quality, from what you're telling me. So, you know,
there's a couple of other things as well that I was going to touch on. From a modern collecting standpoint, one of the reasons why it probably is more desirable is because of that internal connector to plug in a hard drive or a compact flash adapter.
Yeah.
You've got to get expensive add-ons for a 500 to do that. So I understand from a collecting point why people would want a 600, but at the time it was a horrible machine.
Well, that's it. No one can predict the future.
The very first few versions that came out had an earlier version of the Kickstart ROM that had the code missing for the internal IDE header and the card slot on the side.
So it's pointless anyway.
Pointless. They should have brought the 1200 out at the time the 600 came out, or maybe a few months later. They should have squashed the 600 and concentrated on the 1200. Maybe make 1200 better.
Well, if anything, the thing they really should have done was to make it more powerful and shrunk it down a bit. That would have been the ideal move to go with, because that way you feel like you're getting a proper new generation system rather than just. I mean, at the end of the day, so like you could have had a Spectrum. They could have made it twice as powerful if it had been the size of a fucking slab. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The 600 to me felt like the equivalent of the Mega Drive 2.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very unnecessary, and I mean the Mega Drive 2 I suppose sold pretty well because people may have had a faulty Mega Drive and needed to replace it. People were just getting into Mega Drives at the time. Other people were looking to the future.
I can understand its place, although yet again I do think the Mega Drive 2 was poorer quality.
It is. It's got an inferior sound chip and everything in, hasn't it? So I know there's definitely some problems there. Whereas the 600, there was no need for its existence, really, was it? No. Because the Amiga was selling perfectly fine as it was. The Amiga didn't have the longest lifespan of ever system as it was, and so it didn't really have time to make this system necessary. They'd done well with it in Europe. You know, the Amiga was a massive fucking seller. Commodore UK obviously turned the fortunes round of when Commodore were up completely on their arse in America, and so they should have been left to be given autonomy. If anything, it would have been the best move for Commodore of America to made the open offer of perhaps selling on Commodore UK to be a completely separate entity. That could have been private.
That's another story.
Well, that's the thing. If that would have happened, it would have been its own entity that had made their own decisions. They could have moved forward with the Amiga, they could have made laptop versions, desktop versions, and evolved it.
There was prototypes of laptops.
I've seen the prototype towers.
No, there was prototype laptops as well called.
I haven't seen that.
They were called PAWS, PAWS, Portable Amiga Workstation.
So it's a vision of what could have been, and so I mean, I think the Amiga 600 is definitely a flat spot in the tyre that was the turning wheels of the Amiga, and I think you're going to get your wish this time, mate, because last time we couldn't do it. This time, I think this is a definite. The Amiga 600, like it or love it, it might not be too dissimilar to a 500, but it didn't need to exist. It did everything the 500 did and did it worse. At the time, it didn't need it. It wasn't cheaper. It's now more desirable. It didn't bring anything to the party. It's just the same thing in a worse dress, so...
The only positive thing I can think of it at the time, not now, but at the time, was the RF modulator was built into the motherboard rather than having that thing hanging out the back. That's about the only positive I've got for the 600.
Yeah, well, it's too late. It's gone. There's nothing could pull that one back from oblivion. No, I don't think.
I was going to say that's not enough to pull back.
So a couple of the swag guys joined the thread there, the chat thread. I know the chat window isn't flowing the way it should do again. No. So something's not working well, but at least I've got it down here to refer to. Most of the relevant points I am bringing up, guys, so you're not actually missing anything. This is just for people referring back, and I'll always repeat your questions anyway. Most of the chat's coming through, but I'll always check down here anyway, making sure it's coming through. If you are on YouTube, by the way, and your chat comments aren't coming up in the middle, please do leave a note on the video, and I'll see if I can address it afterwards. I might need to do a little bit of tweaking with the platform, but I'm trying to get everything working as perfectly as I can. Right, so moving on then, we've covered something, and Woody's finally got something committed to Room 101, and I think it's a worthy addition, to be honest, because I might not have that much experience with it myself, but I think it's my indifference to it is a sign of just how insignificant it was, because at this point I've been exposed to most things, and I love seeking old consoles and rare variants of certain platforms, and the 600 has never even featured in my thoughts. I've not even thought, well, we need a 600, or I need to get one of those, because it's just that. I think mediocrity sometimes is worse than being utterly shite, because when something's utterly shite, it's memorable. I'm giving an example. The Virtual Boy, right?
Oh, God, yeah.
The Virtual Boy was a terrible design. It had hardly any games for it. It was a poor release window, but it has got some really niche games that are really awesome on it, even though it's so difficult to play. And because
I've got a few 8-bit micros that fall into that category.
Yeah, because shite. But because there's something memorable about them. The Virtual Boy was trying to do something new. Some of the micros you're talking about, people probably never got a chance to because of poor management and market saturation. But I'm sure they were awesome. The 600 falls guilty of being mediocre. There's nothing to make it memorable. Not even being crap at something. If you're eternally crap at something, you'll be remembered for being crap. If you're mediocre, people just forget about you, and sometimes that's worse. Right, so we're moving on, guys, and we're on to my topic for today. And this is something I thought about too. Just to catch you up there, Simon Butler's joined us late. He was saying, what are we talking about? The Amiga 600, Simon. It was a mediocre pile of poop, so it's gone in Room 101. So, moving on now. We're on to my subject, and I haven't really briefed Woody on this one, so he's going to be flying blind on this. And I'm going to uncover this now. And it's Being Player 2. Now, I'm going to explain this one. This is something quite specific. And again, it's something that's kind of come not only from a lot of bad experiences in the past, but from experiences I've got in recent gaming, if you know what I mean. Being Player 2 has always been the ginger stepchild of playing multiplayer games, and there's several reasons why. Right, first of all, when you're Player 2, think about the things you don't get, right? if you're playing a two-player game side by side or online or whatever, player one is always the host. They host the game. They control the menus. They control the settings. They usually have to OK to accept and go into the game. They choose the rules and the options and things like that. So you're playing second fiddle straight away. When you're playing the game, the story tends to revolve around player one, not around player two. You're just some fucking dickhead sidekick along for the ride. When you're physically playing, player two also tends to be the one thinking more about the olden days, especially, and especially true with the consoles, but it does go back to the micros. I was talking the other day with Nez about the original Spectrum keyboard. Now, a lot of people only had a single joystick interface for their Spectrum 48s, and obviously it didn't have its own joystick ports. So if you played any two-player game that was simultaneous, player two was resigned to the keyboard, which was fine for you old schoolers, but I fucking hated it, and my mates would always have...
That was the same with me and my brother, because we had the Amstrad CPC, and it only got one joystick port.
And are you the little...
He got his nice joystick.
Yeah, are you the little brother?
Into the keys, yeah. I'm the younger
You're the little brother, so you'd have had the bum deal every time.
Yeah, every time.
and that's the thing, see, like, being player two just sucks, and it was always the same. It was always, like I say, player two was on the keyboard. Player two got their turn second. If you're playing a two-player game in the arcade that was one after the other, where you took it in turns, everyone would watch player one play their games. Second they lose all their lives, they don't give a shit what you're doing. If you're a group of friends, you're player two, you're still playing. Player one's finished, they'll go, I'm fucking off now because I know I've lost.
Yeah, they will leave you.
Yeah, they'll just leave you on your own. You're like, yeah, thanks, bastards, you know what I mean? And yeah, when it moved into the console days, it was always the case that, especially the main places like Future Zone or Electronics Boutique, Curry's Dixon's, they never sold first-party pads.
Yeah, I was going to say, Mike Lees has put this in the comment. Player 2 always had the shit
controller, yeah. You know what? I had the same because I had... I'm not going to play down Competition Pro because they were generally a decent controller manufacturer.
When you got the Logic 3s and the Mad Cats. And,
Logic 3. Mad Cats is a more modern example. Logic 3 was an older one, and yeah, they sucked. I'm trying to think of some of the other manufacturers who always made shit joypads, and the quality wasn't the best back then anyway. So when a third party came in and tried to make a cheap controller for a modern system, they'd use the cheapest parts and still sell the fucking controller for only about £1 cheaper than the retail price of an original first party joypad.
Yeah.
Especially, it got worse as time went on because like when I had my NES, every NES came with two controllers out of the box. I think the Master System did originally as well, came with two controllers in the box.
That's what annoyed me about the SNES, actually, because my brother got the Super Nintendo, SNES, got Street Fighter 2 pack. Now, Street Fighter 2,
you need a good controller.
For 2 players, and you only get one pad in the box. I ended up with the shitty third-party one, and I think it was Quick Shot, actually. It was a QS
I know the one you mean. It was like really fat plastic one with a grey strip.
Yeah, and the extra large D-pad.
Oh, it was horrible. It felt like the Jaguar D-pad. It was terrible. I know the one you mean because my friends had it. Because I'm pretty sure it had the start and select buttons in a weird position as well, which was really annoying. It
had all the bloody turbo fire switches, and
the L&R buttons were so fucking unresponsive on it.
Yeah, but they were really springy, and it's like, what the hell?
Well, I had my SNES, and I had it with the Street Fighter 2 Turbo pack. And I had the Competition Pro pad, which of course they based all their pads at the time on the Mega Drive shape and layout. But when they made the SNES one, they made it thinner with sharper edges. They had to add L&R buttons, which never felt quite natural for some reason.
These pads it didn't.
No, and somehow they managed to make the D-pad. Now the Competition Pro pad I've got that I use on my Spectrum next, the Mega Drive one with the auto fire buttons above them.
I use on nearly every system.
Yeah, those are brilliant pads, really responsive. Absolutely. But when Competition Pro made the Mega Drive styled pad for the SNES, they added all the auto fire switches and that. The buttons were clicky and unresponsive, which didn't feel natural. The D-pad was unresponsive as fuck. It was honestly, it was terrible. And whenever my mates come around, I'm like, "You're using that. I ain't fucking using that. You're using that. I don't want anything to do with that pad." And they didn't just do it with the SNES, because I found in recent years they made one for the CD32, which was similar. Although,
that wasn't too bad though. That's better than the original.
Well, let's face it, the original CD32 controller is a fucking weird thing anyway. So that kind of made sense. I think they also did one for the 3DO, and I don't think that would have been too bad either. I'm spitballing a bit here, but generally speaking, Player 2, you got the bum deal when it comes to the controller. I think the only plus point I can really think of with Player 2 is some of the in some of the cooperative games or simultaneous two-player games, Player 2 was sometimes more interesting because you had the alternate colours from the default. You know, it's that kind of thing of, like, think about like playing Double Dragon, right? I used to love Double Dragon, and obviously you're always playing as blonde-haired, blue-dressed Billy, and that was what you played if you're on one player. But then you got to play two-player mode, and one of you got the one in the cool new red outfit with the brown hair, and it was a bit of a change-up. You know, if you played, I'm sure there's a million other examples like that. Thinking about when like Street Fighter 2 came out, and you first could play Champion Edition.
Yeah, and you got the different colour.
Yeah, and the Champion Edition colours were all. I mean, yes, you could press start to activate that as Player 1, but the Player 2 colours, so to speak, the Champion Edition colours were more interesting.
Better, yeah.
So it was like it was that was a cooler thing about being it, but being Player 2, it always felt like I say, it was the little brother thing. It was you're the shitty friend thing.
Well, what I can think of another downside to being Player 2, and this is a real life scenario. Me and my brother used to play a lot of beat 'em ups, you know, like Final Fight, Golden Axe, things like that. And when you choose a character, you don't both choose a character at the same time. Player 1 chooses a character, then Player 2 chooses a character. And my brother was always the character I wanted to be.
Well, that's right, and they could make it because they're in control. They could say, right, it's going to be fair, but then like if they press start when you've blinked, you've missed your opportunity to get that character. I know exactly what you mean. I can think of plenty of examples of that. I know things like I'm just trying to think now. Some of the racing games I think were like that, like the kart games, like Mario Kart. The original Mario Kart on SNES. Player 1 started on Mario. Player 2 started on Luigi. Now everyone, when they used to play two-player, whether they were playing battle mode or race mode, tended to go for Toad and Koopa on the far right-hand side.
I always went for Toad.
And that was the thing, see. Some people always had a favourite. Now, if you were Luigi as Player 2, you actually got the advantage there because you were nearer to those end slots than Player 1 was. So you could actually jump across really quick. But you really have to have your wits about you. So I suppose there were a couple of advantages. But, I mean, more recently, think about online gaming, right? Online gaming, even though it's not obvious in the way they structure it, one person's setup, even if you're playing a multiplayer online, one person's console tends to be like the host, so to speak. And if that one craps out, that seems to be the pivotal one. Yeah, they all fall to pieces. And what you get more often than not, much as people complain about people wigging out of online fighting games just before you're about to lose, or things like that. Even with the multiplayer games like that, if you know you're the host, you can completely fucking ruin everyone's 30-minute gaming session by just saying off. As simple as that, you know what I mean? I don't think that's fucking right. So
no, it's not.
It's not just a Player 2 thing; it's a Player 3 thing or a Player 4 thing, just to more of an extent. You know what I mean? And
this was one of the annoying things about. I've lost my train of thought now. I was going to say about going back to the players and the colours and things as well with like Gauntlet. I can see why they brought Gauntlet 2 out, but I remember playing that live on Xbox 360 Live Arcade. And yet again, if the Player 1's console crapped out, everybody just got thrown back to the lobby.
Well, Paul Little, it's interesting you mentioned Gauntlet. Paul Little's just jumped in on the chat and said Golden Axe and Gauntlet are good examples of that. Yeah, I'm sure they were because depending on where you were. Thinking about multiplayer games, something else just occurred to me. I know, depending on the system you were on, some games, if you had a multi-tap for an old console, some systems require that you put them into player 1 slot, some require them to put into player 2 slot.
God, that was annoying.
Generally, if you were player 2, you didn't have as much slack on your joypad. You'd have to sit there a bit nearer to the console, so you'd never get the comfiest seat. Whereas player 3 and 4 would have loads of extra cable going trailing across the fucking room, and you'd have to put up with all them cables in front of your fucking lap in a small room. So yeah, something else that player 2 and not player 3 and 4 had to deal with. It always fucking sucked, man. Fighting games in particular. This is going to go on to something I'll cover on another day, but. When it came to being, a lot of people who love their fighting games and who are casuals will know this more than anybody. Being on player 2 side on a fighting game is always a more difficult thing, and some people don't recognise what it is, and it's actually to do with the way that typical controls have evolved to be more comfortable for right-handed players, right? You do things with your left thumb in terms of directions because you're more likely, if you're right-handed, to be able to tap buttons faster or press multiple buttons with your right hand, yeah?
Yeah.
And if you think about the shape of your hand, with your hand, it's easier to extend your fingers across than it is to actually pull them closer in, because when they pull them closer in, you don't get as fine control. Now, the reason it's more difficult to play on a second player side, especially on a home console with a joypad, is because when you're trying to do your moves towards the left side and you're doing rolling motions, you've got less hands, because your hands are already tense from playing. You try and do a fireball or a dragon punch on player 2 side with a D-pad, and it's very, very hard to do. And it's even more true. It's supposed to be slightly easier with an arcade joystick, but it's not, because it's a less natural movement to rotate your hand outwards to go to the left. So anybody who's on a player 2 side immediately gets like a disadvantage. Now,
unless you practiced it and played it that way.
Unless you extensively practice it. I mean, I know left-handed players who used to play for the sake of like them feeling more comfortable. We used to have like some dodgy, clone Street Fighter 2 machines in our local chippy and that, and we used to play those all the time. And you could just be Ryu or Ken and just batter everybody with the dragon punch that threw fireballs out. Now it was just a matter of who got that dragon punch out first. Hats, Now they used to play theirs. I saw left-handed players play with their hands crossed like that. So they'd have the joystick in their right hand and they'd have the buttons in the left hand, and they learned to play that way. And especially if you're on a player 2 side, that kind of made more sense to them, because them holding a joystick with their right hand and pushing towards the left felt as natural to them as being a right-hander and pushing towards the right with their left hand feels to a right-hander. So it made a lot of sense. So whenever we used to play left-handers, we used to make them go and play on one side to double handicap them.
Okay, Mike Lees has said, this is why I hold joypads upside down, D-pad and buttons controlled with my fingers.
Are you a lefty,
How
Mike?
on earth could you do that?
Mike, are you a lefty? I didn't know you were a lefty. I'm waiting for him to answer now, because I genuinely never noticed.
No, I hadn't, to be honest with you, but okay.
So if Mike's a lefty, that might make a bit of sense, actually. But yeah, I mean, I suppose it could make sense. I'll be honest now, I mean, I'm a unique example because obviously my left hand doesn't work too well. Anyway, you can see straight away the way I'm holding my hands up. My left hand doesn't work too well anyway. People think I use it as an excuse when I play games. And I've said it's hard to describe until you've actually experienced it, but I struggle heavily with the L buttons on a controller. I can't use them.
Yeah, I can't reach them.
And I struggle extensively with playing fighting games on the wrong. I'm handicapped anyway, so you put me on player 2 side, and I'm fucking useless. It's not it's not too bad if I'm playing a charge character. Like the one rare example is Killer Instinct. I can play Killer Instinct on either side because I play charge characters. And the way the combos move in that, it doesn't matter too much because you're not doing rolling motions, if you know what I mean. So I actually play equally as good on player 2 side as player 1 side, which is handy because on my own cabinet, sometimes player 1's joystick goes a bit off. So that I sometimes start up a game on player 2 side and play that side. Oh no, Mike says he's a righty, so I don't know.
Yeah, I've just seen that. That's weird.
Oh man.
He says he's going to post a pic on Facebook later. I'll look forward to seeing that.
I want to see that, Mike. You know what? We should do a challenge at Revival. We should do the upside down control pad challenge and see who can. You know what? I can imagine you play that on a fucking maze game. You could drive some people fucking insane with that. You know what I mean? But yeah, you try playing Bomberman with the controller upside down, you're fucking mental.
That's no different to picking up the skull symbols, isn't it?
Well, exactly. Yeah, you're just fucking handicapping yourself. So, oh man. Andy Johnson said some examples for me would be like playing Sonic 2. Playing as Tails was pointless. Yeah, well, that's a unique example. But I mean, you were definitely someone's bitch then because you had no controller, and you know, platformers are always a weird one for me because I used to love platformers. Like in the early days, I was a big platform game fan, and I always used to ask the question: why are there no more simultaneous two-player platformers? But it made a lot of sense because obviously back in the day, when you only had so many pixels on screen, only had so many sprites. The way they used to do the scroll lock on the screen would be focused on player one, and having two players would ruin your momentum, you know what I mean? Yeah. They've started to get it right in later years. I mean, if you've ever played like New Super Mario Brothers Wii, that's brilliant because obviously the screen can pan in and out so you can stretch apart. And even though it's heavily focused on player one, you can play that game quite openly because there's a lot more real estate on the screen to play it. So I totally get that. But yeah, if they'd have done that with Sonic, it could have been awesome. You know, if they'd have made a simultaneous two-player Sonic game, the classic style now, but with you know, with that kind of mechanic, it might work well. If they were to re-release, have you ever played Knuckles Chaotix on the 32X?
Yeah, only in emulation.
Well, it's a weird game, but if you were to make that game two-player, it could be pretty cool.
That could work. Yeah.
You know what I mean? It could work, you know. But being player two as Tails. To be honest, though, I used that as a training tool. I remember when my niece and nephews were young, I used to put Sonic 2 on and let them just go up to the joypad as player two because they preferred Tails as a character because he's a bit more cutesy. And they couldn't do no damage to what I was doing, so it was great because I controlled the motion. They couldn't die. So, like, the young niece and nephews, they were quite happy playing as Tails, you know. But yeah, I remember I used to let them play like together as well, and the one who was slightly more mechanically adept, I'd always give them the controller for Sonic and the other one the controller for Tails. And
do you know what? On the subject to Sonic 2, I bet I'm probably in a minority here. When I play it alone, I go into the options and change it to Sonic alone. I detest.
Mate, you're not alone. I'm fully of that ilk. He's both a help and a hindrance, especially on the bonus stages, because he can pick up residual rings which can help, but he can also just as easily fucking lose them on the later stages, and he costs you so many rings, it's ridiculous. I'm just having a quick look down the list now. The colour change. Yeah, for colour changes now in games, you don't have to be player two, you got to fucking pay for it. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Andy Johnson said all consoles should come with two pads, in my opinion. You know what?
Yeah,
you are right. I know there's a lot more technology crammed into them these days, but I'm going to blame Nintendo for this. Nintendo were probably the first console manufacturer to fall into that trap. The SNES, I remember, being the first prominent console where they fucked off the concept of two joypads and just they started to ship from day one in the UK with only one controller, and everyone was like, what's this, like the Mega Drive you get two, you know what I mean? At least initially you did.
Yeah.
You used to get two controllers. And Dave Rowland says Cheetah sucks. Yeah, Cheetah, not the best manufacturer out there. Although I've got to be honest, my Cheetah is it the Cheetah 125 Plus? Wasn't too
I
bad.
liked those joysticks. Those were all right until you wanted to play Daley Thompson or WWF WrestleMania.
Yeah, they were terrible.
Anything that required waggling, and forget it.
I had a cupboard full of broken joysticks for that exact reason. I'm just looking at some of the comments here. Rich Spout says he remembers left-handed kids at school having the board rubber thrown at them or given the cane for being left-handed. Sad days.
Unfortunately, a sad fact of the past.
Rich, I'm sorry if you're a lefty and that happened to you, mate, but I've got to be honest, being a kid, I know, like in the olden days, they used to say that if you were left-handed, it was a mark of the devil. I know they used to say that in religious circles. They used to give them like training tools to force them to be right-handed, didn't they?
Yeah.
All kinds of mad shit. My sister's a lefty. I know he is.
My mum is, and she used to get told off a lot for writing left-handed. It's like
Beck's family are quite ambidextrous by nature. Her dad can use both hands quite equally, and Beck's not too bad actually. But that's I'd love to be ambidextrous. I'll be honest; it make things a lot easier.
Yeah, I would.
Andy Johnson says Toe Jam and Earl was a good two-player game, if I remember right. Yes, it was, and the original Toe Jam and Earl, of course, was like an isometric viewpoint, obviously, and that worked well because the kind of game it is. Now, I only recently played Panic on Funkatron, which is the sequel. That's a two-player simultaneous platformer that worked pretty well. I was playing that with Aaron, as it happens, and yeah, it's not too bad. Alan Chang says an alternative headline for tonight: you're going to get the third-party pad.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's yeah. Oh, you're not a lefty, Rich. Now, thankfully, I'm glad you weren't there, mate. That does sound like something that sucks if it happened. But when you mentioned it, then I thought, fuck, I wouldn't put it past him. Some weird shit used to happen at school. I know. Anyway, so yeah.
Alan Chang, Bex could use both hands. Way,
giggity. Right. So being player 2, I mean, I think I've only mentioned the
101 in this.
Yeah, it's not even in contention, is it? And I don't think anybody likes it. I see it so often. I see a lot of kids at conventions get most angst about this because, of course, with modern consoles, you can pick up any controller and side into whichever side you want to be, because even when they're wired, you can choose what side you want to be. I know some PC games are like that as well. Like if you play Street Fighter 4 on the PC, when you start, you can pick whether you're player 1 or player 2, and you can pick what side you're going to be on.
Yeah, and
that's what's like really strange about that one. But when you see kids at conventions, they'll run up to a table, grab the first controller they can, get. I even say it sometimes. I'm going to be player 1. I'm going to be in control. I'm picking this one, and they haven't even checked, and they haven't even realised because the cable's hanging. They pick the player 2, and they're like, "Oh, I'm restarting it. Give me that controller." And so it's not a new thing, and it's not something that's going to go away either, because all kids know that being player 2 sucks donkey balls. It's always going to. If you're playing online, your wrist's being cut off. I've been playing Streets of Rage 4 recently, and I do play it just for an occasional jump, a jump on the 5-minute fuck around. And if I start a game, no one wants to join my game, so I join whatever games are going. And there's a lot of now that the initial period's passed, there's a lot of newbies starting now, and for some fucking alien reason, the dickheads are setting up their own games where they've enabled friendly fire, so you're able to hit each other, which on Streets of Rage 4 is the worst thing you can do, because a lot of your combos depend on both hitting the same enemies together and juggling them, and you can't
get people fighting between each other rather than actually being
and because it's extremely difficult when you do jab each other, you take massive chunks of damage off each other, and it can knock you down pits really easily. It sucks. And I've seen some, they do it purely because they want to punch you out the way, or they don't want you ruining their combos. So being player 2 in that case absolutely fucking sucks. Yeah, it's terrible. Why play a cooperative game where you're instantly going to give the other person a disadvantage because you're playing against a computer and you're playing against them? It's not a fun game in that process. You're just being a prick. So yeah, I don't think there's any argument when it comes to this one. Being player 2 is always going to suck ass unless somebody finds a magic potion to make us all ambidextrous and programs their games where both players have full control. Player 2 is always going to get the bum deal, and depending on whose house you go to, you're always going to end up being player 2. So being player 2, definitely committed to room 101, because no one wants to deal with that shit. Right, so in contrast to the other night, guys, tonight's been pretty decisive, really, because
yeah, absolutely.
there's no contention at all. Two things there that were totally worthy of going into room 101. And yeah, and Woody's finally got one in there. I said we'd get you one in there, mate. I knew there would be a chance to. I've got a couple of videos lined up, guys, I want to do. I did tease the idea that I'll be doing a sort of quick and dirty tutorial on how to create your own stream layouts and set up multi-stream.
I'd be interested in seeing that myself.
Yeah,
actually.
I want to show some. I don't want to give away my total formula, and there is going to be a certain amount of skill involved to be able to create all your stuff, and obviously building your audience and that's up to you. But as far as setting up a streaming goes, I'd like to help a few friends do it because I can't produce that much stuff myself as it is, and I like to watch other people. I like to watch my friends do stuff. You know, we've been locked in the house. I want to see what they've been up to rather than just a conversation or, you know, the occasional soapbox rant. So I want to see more people streaming stuff, and if I can get it going, I want to be able to do a tutorial on how to set up online retro gaming. So maybe some of you guys can come and have a game with me. Assuming the network can take
play
it.
stuff if we can get that sorted out.
Exactly, I think it's the way to do it. Even if we have to get a bit of extra kit and able to do that, then we might just do that. But yeah, so I will be doing a tutorial on that on Thursday this week, guys. Sorry, I've got a really stuffy nose today. I think the pollen count's really up today. I've woke up today and able to breathe. So right now my nose is just getting more and more bunged up as the night goes on. But on Thursday, you might have seen my teaser picture. I've actually now got my Jaguar game drive, which is the new EverDrive for the Jaguar, and I'll be finally doing my video covering the Jaguar, the peripherals, the things you can get for it, the system in general, and obviously reviewing the game drive as well. And I'll be telling you all about that. So join me on Thursday, probably about the same time, and I'll be talking you through that. And I'm going to try and switch Retrogaming Room 101 to weekly now. I haven't actually got anyone booked in for next week's slot, so if anybody here wants to talk about something, do it. Loads of people who've been on haven't been that much big fans of being in front of a camera, but they all try it out anyway.
Put it like this: if you don't, I'll be on again because I've got loads of things to talk about.
Exactly, we could talk about this forever. You know what I mean? And maybe soon I can start doing this series with friends round the house again, you know what I mean? Have people in and all talk about things in person and start reviewing games that way again. So, but yeah, guys, I hope you enjoyed this evening's episode. It seems, Woody, like we've actually gone an hour without the fucking stream breaking down, mate.
I know, it's crazy.
It's a little bit annoying that not all of the chat has managed to find its way through to my joint chat thread, and I had to keep referring to my phone, but at least we've managed to get through a full stream without it breaking down. Yeah, it is a little bit shorter, guys. In all honesty, guys, I originally only wanted this to be a 45-minute show is what I wanted it to be. And ever since day one, it's been an hour and a half or more. So this is about the length.
Because things have either been dropping out like anything, or it's been a lot more indecisive.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. But at least this time we knew what we were going to talk about, and I'm starting to work out my technical issues. So yeah, I want it to be about an hour long, guys. It's been an hour and 15, so I think that's plenty of length of time for this. When I look back at the videos anyway, engagement only tends to be for about half an hour at a time. So I don't want to bore people who weren't involved in the discussion, if you know what I mean. But yeah, anyway, I hope you enjoyed the topics, guys. I'll be back on Thursday with a hands-on review of the Jaguar, and I'll be back next Tuesday, hopefully with another episode of Retrogaming Room 101. But for now, you guys take it easy. I'll catch you later. Say bye, Woody.